morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, May 2nd. I'm Mitch Perry, senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joining my back in the studio after my 9-week sojourn in Tallahassee covering the Florida legislature, and back with my radio partner, Ray Aroa, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper. Ray, good morning.
Good morning, Mitch. You look even better for being up in Tallahassee. I didn't think it was possible, but it made you more vibrant.
I feel marvelous.
By the way, I wanted to shout out our board operator, Skip Sassy, WMNF's Ops Volunteer of the Year, and also on the phones, Irene Matthews, the station's Volunteer of the Year. Congratulations, and thank you so much for making sure that we can just show up here today and just spew whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. The volunteer-driven radio station here, and again, great to be back here. And we're going to talk later in the show. We're going to talk about some history here at Ybor City. I was just wondering about this. One of our guests, we're going to be talking about this demonstration, right, or protest that happened almost 100 years ago in Ybor City with 5,000 women, mostly working-class Latinas, protesting fascism, spreading in Spain and around the world, which certainly has echoes right now. That's going to be later in the show. A couple of historians talking about that with us, including Manoleta, who's in studio right now. But joining us right now is a former television news broadcaster, reporter, and congressional candidate, Democratic congressional candidate, Alan Cohn. Alan, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome back.
Great to have you here in studio. Alan, I want to talk, we did have, of course, we don't talk too much about federal issues sometimes on the show here because we got so much going on here in the Bay Area and in Tallahassee. But, of course, this was the 100-day anniversary of Donald Trump's presidency, of course, Trump 2.0. So want to get to that and kind of the interlink between that and the state because one of the things, of course, that Trump ran on was immigration. And, he promised mass deportations. And whether that's really ever going to happen, I heard the other day, Tom Homan, who's the border czar, said that there's been over 139,000 migrants that have been deported since Trump took over on January 20th. But you're seeing so many high-profile deportations, whether they're college students, people accused of being anti-Semitic, or in some cases, just other folks who their status is a little questionable. We're seeing a lot of that happening here, and that is really one of the biggest issues. But look what's happening here in Florida. As we know, Governor Ron DeSantis, back in January, he called for a special session of the legislature, which, of course, there was some back and forth that initially didn't happen. Then it did on immigration. If you remember, DeSantis was saying, hey, I can't wait for Trump to come back into office. We can get some of these migrants out of here now. I want to get our local folks ready. Originally, the Senate President Al Burton and House Speaker Danny Perez said, okay, we can address that when the President Trump is inaugurated. I mean, DeSantis asked for this before the even inauguration. They ended up, I think it was early February, passing a couple of bills basically to get local law enforcement prepared, a lot of money to them to go out and help. Basically, they have these 287G agreements where local law enforcement can go out and help the feds because, of course, historically, immigration has been a federal issue. So yesterday they had a press conference the governor did down in South Florida. They called it Operation Tidal Wave. And they detained over the last week in Florida over 1,100 migrants that they arrested and deported. And DeSantis was these ICE agents yesterday in Miami-Dade County. They labeled it a historic operation. And they said that it was the biggest ever ICE operation in Florida, and there's going to be more to come. What do you think about this, Alan?
There's a Yiddish phrase, shtick, which means, it is a show. Look, I think there is none of us here today who, if there is an illegal immigrant who has have a record of violating the law, over and above the fact that they are here, if they, are guilty of a violent crime, we don't want them in this country. But at the same time, bad things happen by a 25-year-old white guy as often, or if more often, than a 25-year-old undocumented alien. I think that this kind of obscures deliberately the fact that most families are having a difficult time buying eggs,
Right.
coffee, and produce and everything else, a car.
And now these tariffs added on, that's creating a whole bunch of chaos with our economy.
Yeah, and I think I come at this personally with some credibility because as an investigative reporter for many years, I showed how undocumented workers were being picked up every morning and brought to landscaping jobs or construction jobs.
Absolutely.
And the question always was, okay, they're here illegally. What are you doing about the businesses that hire them? Specifically in Florida, we're not doing anything.
Well,
about the
let's bring that
businesses.
up because actually that was tried to address this year. Now, we passed an E-Verify bill a couple years ago, but that was, and of course, E-Verify is the federal system where you can check, any employer can check the legal status of their worker. And the law 2 years ago was any company over 25 employees or more. So this year, though, and they did pass it in the House, Bernie Jacques from Pinellas County, they did pass it, but it's not going to happen because the Senate did not do the same in terms of it would be for any employee, one employee you'd have to check that. You can't just use an I-9 form. So they're trying to address that, the legislature, but yeah, you're right. It's not going anywhere. But I want to the overall issue, and Ray, I'd like to hear your thoughts about this too, because let's talk about, though, again, immigration, because and I know, again, and we're talking about these polls that came out about Donald Trump, again, evaluating the first 100 days. We'll talk about that in a minute. But immigration and inflation, I would argue, were the top two issues that certainly propelled Donald Trump to defeat Kamala Harris, last November. And there does seem to be an appetite among the American public still. Now, again, that's kind of trending a little bit negative for the president when it comes to these high-profile deportations where they're not going by the letter of the law. The case in the young man in El Salvador, for example. But in terms of overall, the public I have seen consistently in polls is okay with, deporting people, even those who, it's very popular if they have a violent crime attached to them. But obviously what we're seeing now is going beyond that. And again, I mentioned it's less than 200,000 now. The idea of a mass deportation, I don't think is ever going to happen, right? Because they simply don't have enough resources, beds to hold people over, judges, all the processing that you need to do. But I would say one of the reasons the Democrats perhaps lost last year in the November election was that they were kind of clueless on this issue, that there was a lot of migration over the first 2.5 years in Joe Biden's term that Joe Biden just didn't seem to care much about. If you remember last year, that the issue when you bring this up with Democrats, their argument would be, there was this bill, the Langford bill in the Senate, that was going to be a comprehensive, immigration bill that they just jumped on the last year, right? 8 months before the election. So, how sincerely were they about that? So, I wonder in terms of these, these deportations, is it really the worst thing that Trump is doing in terms of overall? I know some people think, again, with the lack of due process, but overall, again, Operation Tidal Wave, they say this is the first of many that are going to be coming here in Florida. They got 1,100 people in the last week.
Well, I mean, to your point about the Democrats, I think they're just confused about who they even are. They've been so obsessed with not being Trump that they don't really know what they're standing for. And then, is this the worst thing that Trump has done? I mean, we already know the playbook, right? He does a lot of out of ordinary things. So they all become this thing. So I don't know that you can say what is the worst. You can't keep up with it. I mean, we're not even haven't talked about the way the stock market went up and down based on the tariffs yet. So there are just so many things. And it seems weird right now because I think voters, why they're out on the street is because they feel powerless in a lot of ways, So they're out doing something to kind of express their frustration. I mean, from a policy standpoint, to Alan's point, you're right. Nobody, is really doing anything to address things seriously. Like you said, E-Verify went through the House, stopped at the Senate. What is anybody doing?
Well, Ray, you speak to, frankly, what Steve Bannon has talked about, which is basically the idea is to throw so many things against the wall. It's impossible to concentrate on one thing because so much is going on. In terms of the immigration issue, there was an appetite in this country by Americans to say we've got to do something about the flood of illegal immigrants coming across the borders. I think where we see now the decline in terms of Trump's approval, on immigration itself is because Americans are now seeing this can happen to any of us. When the president of the United States talks about sending American citizens to that prison in El Salvador, people start to say, that could happen to me. If Mitch Perry says something that Donald Trump doesn't like, is it possible for Mitch Perry to disappear, immediately? Because we are living in a time today where it's not about whether it's legal or not. It's not about whether it's right or it's wrong. It's about what you can get away with.
Right. Well, in terms of the judicial system, that's where it's being kind of held up at times. By the way, I want to tell our listeners, reminding them, I think we have a problem with the phones right now because I was going to give the phone number out, but you can certainly email us.
Yes, the phone.
Yeah, okay, but you can email us at dj@wmnf.org. Immigration is always an issue that a lot of people want to talk about. Staying with, by the way, I want to keep because I don't think, there's so much news, even if you're reading a lot of news about what's going on in Florida on immigration. So our new Attorney General, James Othmeyer, right? So he did this incident a couple weeks ago, or I should say they allowed this to happen, where they actually arrested in Florida. They arrested a man who was
an American citizen.
Yes. Now, he went back to Mexico, I believe, but he was an American citizen, and he was actually held in a jail for like almost 24 hours, perhaps, or maybe it was a little over a day, less than a day. We covered it at the Florida Phoenix very extensively. But what happened there is that a federal judge in South Florida, Kathleen Williams, now she's placed a temporary block on the immigration law in Florida that was passed in February, citing concerns that it may be unconstitutional. But Othmeyer initially told law enforcement so he told them, okay, stop arresting people like they did with this guy a couple weeks ago. But then he pivoted and he wrote a letter saying he, quote, cannot prevent them from doing so. Now, in response, this past week, the judge down in South Florida wrote in an order that Othmeyer can be found in contempt of court for that letter. And they're going to have a hearing. Jackie Jonas, our reporter from the Florida Phoenix, is going to be going back down to Miami at the end of this month, where there's going to be a hearing on that. And our Attorney General may be held in contempt of court because he actually told law enforcement to violate the federal judge. We're talking about what Trump is maybe doing or not doing. It's in terms of immigration, I really want people to pay attention to what's happening here in Florida because, again, maybe, that law that was passed in early February, right now, the judge has said is unconstitutional. She's looking, or it could be, she's reviewing it, and right now they can't be going around arresting people.
Meanwhile, the Attorney General has asked for a stay on the judge's block.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. Othmeyer said, okay, we'll abide by it. Then he said, no, I can't control these officers.
And we should note that, even local law enforcement, I think as you guys reported, Bob Gualtieri, the Pinellas Sheriff, said, we take our orders from a judge.
That's right.
That was interesting.
You'll notice that the new Attorney General is making more news than the last Attorney General did in 4 years for all the wrong reasons. And I think that what we're seeing playing out here over and over again is a lack of good judgment, whether it's involving what you're just talking about, or the fact of the charity
Hope
Florida,
which is a mess, which right now looks like won't be investigated because
they're concerned about that.
Because
we have to rely on the federal government at this point. Alex Andrade, the lawmaker who was pushing this in the committee, he announced last week, okay, we're done. The committee weeks are over. Session's ending next week, and this now it is today actually, and he's hoping that the U.S. Attorney in North Florida or Attorney General Pam Bondi will act. And I wouldn't put my dollars on that.
I would not bet on that. And, for somebody who is experienced, I mean, he was the governor's chief of staff for a number of years, to make so many missteps. I think it's
I think he's very vulnerable when he runs for election in 2026 next year. And I'm curious, by the way, what's Pivot? And again, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking here, Mitch Perry, Ray Rowe. We're speaking with Alan Cohn, a former Democratic congressional candidate and former, of course, longtime reporter. Most recently, I guess, on Sarasota, ABC affiliate down there. Of course, did some great work with the ABC affiliate here in Tampa. We can't take your phone calls right now, but we could take your emails, dj@wmnf.org.
You can also send a text to to 813-433-0885.
Again, I don't want to get too much into talking about Trump because we'll just dominate. We've got other things to talk about here. But I will say this, and I knew this was coming, folks, because we were on WMNF. So Trump signed an executive order last night aiming to slash public subsidies to PBS and NPR, and he's alleged bias in the broadcasters reporting. In fact, I saw the press release that came out this morning. They cited all these different examples of both NPR, mostly NPR, some on PBS, of stories that were they consider questionable in terms of the fairness. That's a whole different story. You'll be hearing that when we do our fundraising at the end of this month, because not that we get that much federal money from the feds, from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB, but that is going to go away. I mean, DOJ has done all these other things. I mean, for sure, that's the low-hanging fruit. But anyway, I want to talk. So we have you here, Alan, about the Florida Democrat. You're a Democrat, a proud Democrat. So last Thursday in Tallahassee, you mentioned James Uthmeier, because I'm thinking about this. This is my own theory with Jason Pizzo. So Jason Pizzo, who was the Democratic Senate leader in the Florida, we should say in the Florida Senate and the Florida House, the Democrats are literally the super minority. There's so few of them in the legislature. Of course, they lost two in the House last year, Susan Valdez from Tampa being one of them. But Pizzo shocked everybody last week. Now, he's a centrist. He's very tough on crime. He's a former prosecutor himself. So he's not the most left-wing dude at all, but it was still stunning. And it also came out the same day that David Jolly, the former Republican turned independent turned Democrat now, who is making some serious noises about running for governor, announced that he's still in the race, basically. So Pizzo quits dramatically last Thursday as a Democrat. He's now an independent. One of the things he said was that the Florida Democratic Party was dead, which is, a very harsh thing to say. And he's just bailing out now, being an independent. But we know, we did the show. Our listeners are very tuned into what's going on politically. Florida is very much a red state right now. What was your reaction when you heard what Pizzo did?
I think, like all of us, I did not see this coming. What I know is that Jason Pizzo was making the first initial steps to run for governor. I think he's come up here a number of times. I have watched him a little bit. He's a well-spoken man, and he would have been a good candidate for a governor. It would have been interesting to see a primary between him and David Jolly and whoever else. I think that what I picked up is that there is something going on in terms of the relationships between Pizzo and Fentress Driscoll and Nikki Fried that a lot of us don't have insight into. They may in many ways be competitors of each other. I think it's unfair to say that the Democratic Party of Florida is dead. I think that there are challenges. I think that Chairwoman Fried is doing the best she can with the resources that she has. I think the party itself is hamstrung by the fact it is more difficult right now for Democrats in Florida to raise money than it used to be because, and I've had this experience myself, if you're calling and trying to raise money from people in California to help Democratic candidates and causes in Florida, a lot of times over the phone, you could hear their eyes rolling in back of their head because Florida again. And it kind of, the bottom line there is we have to start winning races here before we can earn the support of Democrats outside of Florida and be able to compete dollar for dollar for what the Republicans bring to bear. But there, from what I am seeing, there is a determination in terms of the party, and it is unfortunate that Senator Pizzo made the comments that he made. I don't quite understand for somebody who is interested in running for governor why leaving one of the major parties is the way to go if that is his intent.
Right.
Because I think David Jolly's calculation is he has a better chance of winning
joining a party
than running as an independent.
Right. And now I will say about Jason Pizzo is he's very wealthy, so he can kind of have the independence of saying, like, I don't need the party apparatus, but the party structure, that would be different. What my theory is, which I just came up this morning, but let's watch this play out the next year, is he is dead. He's still considering running for governor. He's not dismissed that as an independent, which would be very hard. we just mentioned James Ethmeyer. So James Ethmeyer, who is the Attorney General right now, Republican, named by DeSantis, not elected by anybody, of course, because he replaced Ashley Moody. But he's going to be, I think, an unpopular guy a year and a half from now on the Republican side and the Democrat side. But it's going to be, the way the state is structured right now, with the Democrats having such a voter, it's going to be tough right now for any Democrat, I would put some money on to win any statewide race next year. I think Pizzo even thinks that way too, which is why maybe he's thinking like as an independent, he might have a better route. That's very questionable. But I would see Jason Pizzo, this is probably my own thought, running as an independent for Attorney General. So think about that, folks, in a year if that ever happens. Only because he has, again, he's a former prosecutor. He just voted yesterday. They're voting today on this citizen-led, the big bill, one of the worst bills that's going up there, which is going to make it harder to pass citizen-led constitutional amendments, right? So yesterday, it's bouncing back to the Senate today. It's been bouncing back between the two chambers the last 2 days. But Pizzo said yesterday to Don Gates in the chamber, he said, I will vote for this bill, which the Democrats think is anathema, if you can show to me, you can say why that we're putting a provision in there that will ban people in government from using taxpayer money to advocate for a constitutional amendment, which is what we know what Ron DeSantis did last year for both Amendment 3 and Amendment 4, opposing that, right? We all know, we all saw it. Somehow we got away with it. So that's part of this bill that they're going to pass today. And Pizzo actually voted for that, which he can be an independent, but I know that I don't believe he really believes in that bill. I think that's very calculated that he did that vote because this gives more power to the Office of Election Security, and it's a police force. So you're saying you're correct because the Republicans will argue that this bill is a good bill because it's cracking down on fraud, right? Signature petition fraud, which they have found, and it's always there, by the way. It's happened in every ballot measure that's ever happened. And it's not acceptable, but it happens. But they're again making it much harder because the Republicans are terrified that we almost legalized weed last year and also repealed the 6-week abortion law. So anyway, that's just something for me to throw out there. Somebody, by the way, just again, so if you can text. Send us a text at 813-433-0885 or send us an email. We're having problems with our phones right now, dj@wmnf.org. So we got a note here. Can you guys speak about the DeSantis push for New College to absorb Ringling Museum and USF Sarasota Manatee? I think it's a terrible idea, and I don't trust Richard Corcoran to do anything right. Are you familiar with that at all, Alan, about Sarasota? There's talk about him, New College, absorbing the Ringling Museum.
I've seen the stories about that, and I think there's just a lot to be concerned about in terms of bringing the Ringling or even USF Sarasota Manatee into the New College fold. A couple of years ago, before all this happened with New College, there was a cooperative agreement between the 5 colleges down there, in New College, USF, other schools down there, to actually work together and offer students the ability to take courses at the various colleges. I am more concerned about the transformation of New College and other schools in Florida to restrict the courses to a political philosophy, and we are teaching our youngsters a specific political philosophy, and not in terms of a liberal arts education where all sides of an issue are talked about. That is my growing concern about higher education in general in Florida, because we're not just seeing it down in Sarasota and Manatee counties. We are seeing this begin at the other schools across Florida.
I should say my understanding is that the museum is managed by FSU. Not the Ringling College. So at least they would keep their independence. The college would, in that sense.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening. By the way, our phones are now working, 813-239-9663. You're here listening to The Skinny here, 11:30 a.m. I'm Mitch Perry here at WMNF with Ray Rowe, and we're speaking with Alan Cohn, former anchorman down in Sarasota, of course, with ABC 28 here in Tampa, great reporter over the years, and also a Democratic congressional candidate. He ran last time in the race against Laurel Lee. Is that correct? No, you didn't run that race. You ran
22.
Okay,
and 20.
Okay, 20. Yeah, and again, I'm sorry. I covered some of those elections, including when I remember writing a story with Creative Loafing when we were hanging out in Plant City. I say this now because these days I'm hanging out in Plant City a little more often in my personal life.
Hey.
So we got a note from Elizabeth about Pizzo. She says the reason why Jason Pizzo quit started when he was upset that Democrats removed do-nothing Manny Diaz from office as the chair of the Florida Democratic Party and elected Nikki Fried, and because we went to unweighted voting for Democratic counties, which is an issue we can get into another show because it's very complicated. And then Elizabeth writes, he liked all the power being concentrated in South Florida, but here we in the rural central areas pushed the envelope. The last straw was because he found out there was not support for him as a candidate for governor. He's been voting the Republicans quite a bit, and we're tired of it. Thank you, Wiz, for that. That's true in terms of on the criminal justice issues, he's really alienated Democrats. He voted last year, the bill that made it easy, death penalty for child rapists, I think it was, which, that's something that maybe some people would support. But there was a couple other issues that he voted with Republicans on. And we've got a couple callers here we've got Alan for a few more minutes here. So let's stay with this, talking about Florida politics here. And so let's go. Our phones are working. So we've got John in St. Petersburg. Hi, John. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Mitch and the gang. I love your show. Thanks for taking my call. My observation is about private versus public. Public radio, public television is being wiped away from our government and perhaps being privatized, like immigration camps, like universities. And in respects to your conversation today about Florida and the legislature and privatizing or publishing things, what's your it almost seems like a question between profit and non-profit.
Yeah, so sorry.
Thanks for the call, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think with the radio is a little different. I mean, you've already seen them pushing the charter school bills that are on DeSantis' desk now, so we're moving in that direction. Charter schools accepting taxpayer funds but not being beholden to the same standards as public schools. So that's kind of a form of that.
Well,
right?
we've really, in fact, that was just, there was a law a couple years ago, right, that now anybody can apply to get vouchers. Right, it's like we've been doing this in Florida for 20 years. Jeb Bush led that revolution of vouchers and all that, and people have always said that that's a way to drain the public school system here. But that bill that was the big House Speaker's renters big project a couple years ago now they've opened it for anybody. It doesn't matter what your economic level is now, because historically that was like for poor places with poor school districts.
Right. So now if I'm doing okay, I can take, some charter school money and help, with my tuition bill for my kid.
Well,
okay.
I was going to say, let me make two quick points in terms of what you're just talking about here. There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court today about public financing of religious charter schools. And you talk about draining the public schools of their resources. That is a issue that is really frightening. Number two, in terms of what the caller was asking about in terms of NPR and public broadcasting, yes, we're very concerned about that, but I see it as an example of a larger picture, that this administration doesn't want opposing or
critical
views questioning what they are doing. And it's playing out in terms of financing public radio and public television. It's also playing out in terms of commercial broadcasting, because you have the president suing ABC News, CBS News, the Washington Post.
By the way, as a journalist, let's talk about the CBS, the producer of 60 Minutes quit last week, right? Because he's disgusted because there's that Paramount deal that Sherry Redstone is wants. She's been interfering basically with 60 Minutes, where they've never had any interference, which is why it's such a successful program. But because they want this merger to be approved by the Trump administration, so she has been getting her hands involved. And the executive producer quit. He said, "I can't deal with this anymore."
Yeah, and I worked at CBS News. That's where I was basically born and raised. My dad worked at CBS for 30 years. I cut my teeth at CBS News, knowing that I was working for the finest journalism organization in the country. So this is sad, but it also, in my experience in all my years in journalism, it was rare that there was any interference in terms of the stories that I did. I can tell you stories, but it's happening more and more often now, and it is making the general public dumber. I mean,
that's a whole other subject. I call it the TikTokization of news. We've got a couple more callers here for our guest, Alan Cohn here. Let's see. Somebody just dropped off. I was going to take them. So let's go now to DeAndre and Brandon. DeAndre, good morning.
Good morning. I got a Tallahassee question. It's about the free kill law. It seems that most opportunity for people to get representation is only when medical misdiagnosis or malpractice results in death.
Right.
I'm curious, what if there's just like misdiagnosis of a sort of malfeasance that can, be distinguished in some way? Can that be brought to court? I've been struggling myself and with quality of treatment issues. I won't get into the details, but I'm alive, but it's really drained our family finances looking for help, but then as well, me not being capable to manage, work and all those things.
Yeah, so the free kill bill, free kill malpractice law, it looked, by the way, a couple days ago that it was going to not happen. It was stalled. And yet yesterday...
Thanks for the call, DeAndre.
Thank you very much. They did pass that legislation. Thank you, DeAndre. And let's make sure to go to that. So I want to tell people exactly what that would do. This is a big deal because we've had medical malpractice laws that are pretty strong here for like decades. So I'm reading from the local one report here. The legislature passed a bill that would repeal the state's so-called, quote, free kill law, a statute preventing many families from seeking damages and medical negligence deaths. The free kill law has actually been in place since 1990 and bars families from suing for non-economic damages and medical malpractice wrongful death cases if the deceased was over 25, unmarried, and had no children under 25. The move is a victory for families who have been fighting to have the law repealed. So this is a big deal for sure. And the bill is going to DeSantis' desk. He may veto it, though, because this is, I don't know, this is a very complex bill. The trial lawyers are been pushing this thing, which he hates, DeSantis says, the lawyers. But it's, I think on the surface of it, it's going to help out a lot of people, quite frankly. So thank you for that call here. We just got a couple of minutes here with... We're gonna wind up the segment here, Alan. Alan, it's great having you in here, of course, and there's so much more we could talk about. We do need to move on here. What else you want to tell us here? Again, I guess 100 days, 103 days of Trump now. A lot to go here. What are your biggest concerns going forward here for all of us here in Florida, here in the Tampa Bay area?
Well, as I said on Florida this week, that when we were on 2 weeks ago, I think the number one issue, whether you're working in local government, state government, or federal government, is affordability. Just families being able to make it are getting more and more difficult. And, we talked about the price of eggs. Well, just 3 short months ago, you could buy a bag of Dunkin' Donuts coffee for $7.50. It's now selling for $14, $15, $16 at Publix.
Really?
Yes.
I don't buy that, so I know that, but that's intense. I mean, that's really crazy. We're really concerned. With again, toys is the thing. I think we're all like tripping on with these tariffs with China, especially. Yeah,
I mean, I am concerned about the economy, and it has not played out yet. If you listen to economists, a tidal wave is coming, and it's self-made, and it has not really bitten yet. But it's coming, and as I said on Florida this week, the number one priority in Florida would be property insurance, making Florida more affordable again, and they have not done anything. Right. They have not done nearly enough. So all this other stuff in terms of ICE raids and Gulf of America baloney. I mean, it's all to cover up the fact that they are doing nothing to make it easier for men and women and families in Florida to actually pay their bills. And if you remember when we were on Florida this week, there is a pendulum in politics. And what the Republicans are welcoming is the pendulum swinging back. Now, the challenge is for Democrats is to step up and reclaim the tradition of being for working families and middle-class Americans. And, that is what many of us are working day and night in doing.
All right, Alan Cohn, former congressional candidate, former anchor and reporter here in the Tampa Bay area. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Scape this morning.
Anytime, my pleasure.
All right.
Thanks so much. So May is Historic Preservation Month, and a municipality that preserves its history quite well is St. Petersburg. Joining us once again on the program is a Tampania who actually collects his paycheck across the bridge these days, Manny Leto, Executive Director for Preserve the Burg. Manny, thanks again for being here, and congrats. I think your 4-year anniversary in that position is coming up here this summer.
Yeah, in 2 months. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. Manny, I feel like I can say this to you because you cut your teeth here and then some in Tampa. Tampa Bay History Center, editor of Cigar City Magazine, worked for the Ybor City Museum Society. But I think it's quite easier to literally put your hands on the past in St. Petersburg than it is here in Tampa. How wrong am I on that?
Well, you're going to get me in trouble, Ray. I think that both cities have a layered history, an architectural history that you can explore. And so whether that is just really walking along Central Avenue in downtown St. Pete, where 60% of those structures were built before 1960, or, exploring Ybor City, I think both have their place and offer a sort of distinctive Florida experience. Those places just feel a little bit different, and you definitely have a distinct sense of place in St. Petersburg when you're walking, again, Central Avenue or down in Roser Park or Driftwood. Those are really unique places.
Let's talk about Roser Park. And I want to talk about Ybor because it's going to come up here. We can't talk about the prices of things here on the air, but there are these tours and talks, even a road trip lined up because Preserve the Burg is doing all these Preservation Month activities. And this weekend, it starts in Roser Park on Saturday with this first of walking tours that explore this. Roser Park's this hilly, totally kind of peaceful neighborhood over there. What is so special about Roser Park to you? And what are some things that maybe even like, I don't know what they call the great St. Petersburg people, but the goodest burger might not know about that part of town?
Well, it is the start of Historic Preservation Month, and Roser Park was the first local historic district created in St. Petersburg. And so we thought it was appropriate to kick off our Preservation Month activities in Roser Park. So actually tomorrow's tour is sold out, but we are offering another one on May the 10th.
Okay.
Roser Park is one of those, those very delightful points of discovery in St. Petersburg. I mean, you kind of head to the south side of the city, and then you end up in this neighborhood that just does not look like anything else on the Gulf Coast. You almost feel like you're in Atlanta or some other city with all these winding roads and set at different elevations, all kind of right along Booker Creek. But I guess one thing that people wouldn't know is that in some ways Roser Park really began, or at least was one of a very early effort to sort of pay attention to our architectural history in St. Petersburg, and it was the first historic district, first local district in the city.
And so you're also, on Sunday, you're going to walk through historic Old Northeast, a lot of really nice 20th century homes there. You mentioned Roser Park being this first historic district. I want to ask you about this recent new historic district around Mirror Lake. It's the first new one in St. Pete since 21. There's a lot of people who really also do lament how quickly and dramatically St. Pete is changing, right? And this designation for Mirror Lake doesn't mean development will stop there. In fact, these existing height allowances, I think 125 feet, they remain in place. These currently approved projects in the neighborhood will move forward as they are. Does this kind of designation and this certificate of appropriateness that developers will now have to get pump the brakes on that previous stuff? Because one thing, there's rarely a public hearing on this kind of stuff because a lot of these certificates are approved on the staff level, right?
So there's a lot there. So I will kind of back up a little bit and say that almost 2 years ago, or over 2 years ago, the neighbors, residents of the Mirror Lake neighborhood approached Preserve the Berg for our help in creating this local historic district around Mirror Lake. This is something that had its roots kind of pre-COVID, and then was actually proposed by a member of city council and then withdrawn. So it had a long history, and then the residents, along with Preserve the Berg, picked it up again about 2 years ago. I think that there is an argument to be made for a sense of place and for different areas of any city to have their own sort of unique identity and, again, their own kind of distinct feel and vibe. And Mirror Lake is certainly one of those places. When it was originally platted, it is one of the oldest neighborhood in St. Petersburg, originally the source of drinking water for the city. When it was created, the idea was that you would have this tranquil place that was separate and distinct from the downtown. And so what you see in the zoning code and is now perhaps a little bit more codified is in this designation is that, yes, the development along Mirror Lake will perhaps be a little bit less intensive. But it does not preclude people from redeveloping those parcels or building something new. And we do see new projects happening in that area literally as we speak.
And by the way, that voice belongs to Manny Leto. He's executive director at Preserve the Berg. May is Historic Preservation Month. Preserve the Berg has all these amazing events planned, including one in Tampa, which we'll talk to as we transition to Sarah McNamara as well. But there's another structure, Manny, that I think about there in St. Pete. It's 921 10th Avenue North. It's the historic Euclid Church. St. Petersburg City Council late last year denied a reuse permit there. It would have given the church a new life as an events venue. Preserve the Berg actually endorsed this reuse, kind of putting you against some of the neighbors, which is an interesting position for you guys they were concerned about potential noise. The owners there, Noam and Irene Krasinansky, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, are now going to restore it as a church. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
How unique are those owners in the Krasinanskys? Like, I mean, they're not necessarily developers, right? Like, who would get denied, not sell it, and then say, okay, the neighborhood wants a church, we're going to build a church?
Right. Well, I can't speak for the owners, but what I can say is, as you pointed out, I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary, and one thing I would say is that working in this environment, this preservation environment, it's unpredictable. And it is, you really just can't plan, I think, for some of these things. Normally, we are at City Council to try to encourage an owner to save their building and to not demolish it. So we are frequently in that position of saying, hey, there's value in this structure. It should stay up. In this case, you had owners who actually did want to keep their building in place, and you had the neighbors expressing concern about the plan for redevelopment. Preserve the Berg did support that effort because the Euclid Church is a designated local landmark. It's coming up on its 100th anniversary or is close to it. And you've got these private owners that are willing to put their own money into saving this property. The neighbors were concerned about parking and they were concerned about noise. I don't want to diminish those concerns. I would say that any redevelopment in a historic neighborhood that was developed pre-automobile, it does not have a lot of driveways, right? So you're always going to have that issue with parking. And in fact, there is a provision within the St. Petersburg Historic Preservation Ordinance that actually gives some leeway for the redevelopment of historic properties with regard to parking. And so, that is something where I would say there is a little bit of common cause there with maybe the YIMBY community, the Yes in My Backyard community. There is perhaps at times an overemphasis on on parking. And so that provision was added into the preservation ordinance so that, it was recognizing, hey, these old buildings, they weren't built when we were an auto-centric community. And so we need to really allow for the redevelopment of these properties without saying, okay, you need X number of parking spaces and all of this. So, I wish them well. I think that they have found perhaps a path forward. I think there's some solutions there. But if we're going to say we can't develop historic properties because there's no parking, I mean, then that affects Ybor City, it affects Gulfport, it affects, lots of historic neighborhoods in St. Petersburg. And so what are we just not going to do anything in those neighborhoods because we can't park, 3.5 cars per whatever the ratio is? There has to be some allowance for, hey, this is a special use case. It's a historic building that should be preserved.
Yeah, let's talk about Ybor City because somehow, some way, you are going to drag a bunch of St. Pete people to Ybor City as part of Preserve the Berg's Historic Preservation Month itinerary. How did you manage that? Is there like some Preserve the Guava launch happening here? What is happening?
Well, Ray is referring to my roots in history in Ybor City, and the fact that I'm sort of I wear two hats sometimes. I wanted to create what we're calling a road trip program, where we're bringing people to other parts of the Tampa Bay area to see how preservation works in their community. Mm-hmm. So whether that's going to Sarasota, whether that's going to Heritage Village, whether that's going to Ybor City, I think there's lessons that can be learned. How does preservation work in Tampa versus how does preservation work in St. Petersburg? Our members and our supporters and hopefully the listeners here are curious about old buildings and the history of Tampa Bay. And so whether that's in St. Pete or Ybor City, I think that, they would find equal cause. And so the road trip was just kind of a fun way. I mean, we do all of these walking tours in St. Petersburg, Central Avenue, Mirror Lake, Roser Park, as you mentioned. So I just thought, well, let's go explore some other areas. So I'm bringing a group to Ybor City. There's still plenty of room to sign up for that. So you'll get a little bit of a Tampa local perspective on Ybor City, but really with a look at preservation policy and practice and how does preservation work in Ybor City? What can we take away from Tampa and then bring to St. Petersburg?
And by the way, you can get more information on all of this, preservetheberg.org for all this stuff. Manny, thank you for being here. Let's stay in Ybor City, though, and maybe you could stick around. I want to stick with more historians here. I want to welcome back to the show Sarah McNamara Tempena, who now teaches history at Texas A&M. Sarah, are you still there?
I'm here.
By the way, congrats on receiving the Sarah A. Whaley Book Prize for the National Women's Study Association for your book, Ybor City, Latinas. I'm losing the crucible of the Latina South. I'm sorry.
South. You got it.
I lose track of time, Sarah, but March marked 2 years since the unveiling of this mural in Ybor City. Dolores Ibayuri, I think, is on there. She rallied against Franco, Guatemalan labor organizer Luisa Moreno, and of course Margot Falcon Blanco, who was born in the district. These women are in your book, Ybor City, Crucible of the Latina South. They were fighting for their lives in the Reconstructive South, but also for the well-being of future generations, right? And we're talking today because that mural commemorates something that happened in 1937. As Mitch alluded to at the beginning of the show, there was this big anti-fascist women's march. And on that day, 5,000 women marched from 7th Avenue to Tampa City Hall, where they read a letter of protest to the mayor. And we're talking about it here in this last 6 minutes or so because this weekend, just ahead of a big May Day protest planned around the city, a group will honor that march, and they're going to walk from the archway in Ybor to Centennial Park. You're supposed to read from your book that day. How does that make you feel? Like nervous, excited? I don't think anyone's really commemorated this march in this way yet.
No, nobody has commemorated the march. So just to not get everybody's hopes up too much, it is the end of the academic school year. So the muralist on the project, Michelle Sawyer, is going to be the one who will read for me because I won't be able to be there. I have to be at a dissertation defense here in Texas, unfortunately. But I think it's really exciting. So, from the point at which we launched the project back in 2023, one of the important things behind it was to find a way to memorialize historical events that we can no longer see. With what Manny was just talking to you all about with historic preservation, so much of that work, right, really revolves around saving what we can see and the things that are important and that make us feel a texture and a place of belonging and a sense of history that we can preserve. But there's also so much that you can't preserve, right? That depends on how something is memorialized, how it's remembered, and the ways that that is inherent to who we all are. And I heard you all speaking earlier in the show about issues of education and what it has to do with belonging. And one of the things that's so important about projects like the Mural and Marker Project in Ybor City is that it has had outcomes that I never foresaw. One of the women who is the leader behind the anti-fascist march coming up in Tampa, the Memorial March on May 6th, which is the anniversary of the historic event. She is originally from Mexico. She lived in California, has organized in Washington, D.C., and now lives in Tampa. And seeing the mural and marker was something that gave her a sense of belonging and empowerment, especially against the current political backdrop that everybody is experiencing. And that isn't the first time that I've heard that kind of testimony about the impact of public spaces like this. So I find it absolutely incredible that there's going to be a group of women who are, everybody's invited, you don't have to be a woman, to the Memorial March, where people are going to think about what does it mean to walk in the footsteps and walk the pathway of those who did the same in 1937 when we're seeing similar political processes emerge in our current nation as well.
And I want you to squeeze maybe one or two questions in here. You're also a college educator, right, in Texas. We're talking about education. In a lot of ways, Florida and Texas seem to be always outdoing each other as far as how authoritarian they can be. A couple of weeks ago, we welcomed two local professors, tenured, albeit, who said their students come to school to be challenged. They said they themselves felt an obligation to stand up and call what's happening in higher education in our state for what it is. But that's not easy for all professors. How are you faring, especially as a history teacher in the Lone Star State?
It's actually, so ironically enough, with what is happening politically, which we're not always aware of, Texas is behind Florida in terms of the oppressive nature of the laws. So SB 17 in Texas is the primary law that put different kinds of restrictions on higher education, but it did not restrict any form of research, any kind of public speaking, or any classes. And the Texas state legislature meets every other year, so it's not the same annual event that happens in Florida. Right now, there is a new bill under consideration that is very similar to Florida-based legislation called SB 37. And SB 37 would be the first law to reach into classroom curriculum, not in terms of, so I am a tenured professor and I teach mainly upper level classes, but it would absolutely affect lower level and intro courses, which are the courses that give people the basic background, that teach them how to think at a collegiate level, that introduce them to learning beyond a curriculum that has, been either that has been approved in different ways in a state-based context, right? All curriculum is not created in the same format. If you're looking at a state like California or New York, there are boards of education that approve textbooks and that approve K through 12 ed. They include professors, they include educational experts. But if you look at places like Texas, it's not uncommon to find faith-based leaders to be on those committees, for them to be primarily political appointees. They have very different ways of making decisions about what's learned in K through 12, which has an outcome in how prepared students are for a college classroom. So when you are taking an intro course, that's why they're so important, because it's the first time that students are generally learning to think independently. And that's why so much focus on those courses takes place in but in both Texas and in Florida before the state legislatures.
Sarah McNamara, author of Ybor City, Crucible of Latina South, a book that does vividly describe the 1937 anti-fascist Women's March, a march that will be memorialized this weekend. Tuesday, May 6th.
What time?
It's going to be, starts at 5:30, correct?
Yes, Tuesday, May 6th, and everybody's meeting at the Ybor City Arch at 7th Avenue and Nuccio Parkway.
That's right. Sarah McNamara, thank you so much for joining us
Sarah.
again. Manny Leto, thank you from Preserve the Berg, Historic Preservation Month happening right now. Alan Cohn at the top of the show, thank you so much. Mitch, it's really great to see you here. I hope I see you next week, but I think we're going to go every other week. Irene Matthews, sorry we couldn't work you on the phones today, but she is back there. Skip Sassy is on the board for us. Once again, you're listening to WMNF Tampa. I believe Joel and Shilke is in Studio One.
I think so.
Somebody's
It's
in there.
dark.
It's pretty dark, and it's looking pretty sexy and look like it's going to be a great show. So keep listening, keep supporting this radio station, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.